maybe a little bit of introduction. I can say that, yeah, let me see here. Here we go. That's my bio. A little word cloud of it. Don Brown. I'm happy to be here with all you folks, and it gives a little bit of background. And if you really think about what I do, what I do is I speak and I write and I coach and I sell. Happy and proud to do every one of them. And what I really do is I help people with people. And my point of view is really one of simple truths. Two things. I'm in the business of simple truth, and I'm in the business of doing something different. And that was her comment there too. And if anybody wants to, and we can keep track of some of these chats, and I see Laura Hendry coming and joining us. Glad to be with you too, Laura. It's been too long. What I was getting at is if you have had, the first one that we talked about was all about still new rules of engagement, but a different one. The simple truth there and the doing something different was, let's do a better job of paying attention to other people, being present with other people, because I'll tell you what, it's a 50-50 chance. It's a 50-50 chance. And if I look at what we, the simple truth that binds us all on these three, it's about new rules of engagement. It's not the same world it was. It takes new rules. You look at different theories of leadership and different theories of management. Generally, they are built out of and based upon the business dynamics or the organizational dynamics of their day. Well, we've talked a little bit, and we'll talk some more about the business dynamics of our day, but the new rules of engagement have to do, according to our research and our experience, with three things: learning to be present, learning to ask, and learning to follow a protocol. And like I mentioned, that idea of learning to be present, if you want to, that first rule of engagement, learning to be present. If you want to put a chat in there, I don't see any, but if you want to, tell me, how did you do one thing different this last week? Did you take one time where you spent 15 minutes with the TV off? Did you take one instance of all technology off with the kids? Did you carry out a business meeting? Most of the sessions that we do, one of our rules is, one of our formalized rules is, put your electronics, laptops, phones, put them on the floor and face down. And matter of fact, I can say that that's something that we did not too long ago. Is we had another session between now and the time we saw you last. So if you do, go ahead, tell me what worked for you. Tell me what didn't. Tell me what worked for you. Tell me what didn't. And if you see that, Terry or Kelly, if you see that somebody's chatted something in, let me know, because sometimes I can't see it. All righty. And I would, too, if while you have it, check your microphone up here. If it's red, whoever's typing right now, if it's red, it means it's green, it means your microphone's live. So you might want to check that. So somebody is typing in. All right. So these are our new rules of engagement. I do have a chat. I was present this morning while driving. I averted a very outstanding, Cheryl. Cheryl is, I'm sorry, that's Terry. Yeah, Terry, you were present this morning while driving, and how many times aren't we? My God. And what would have happened, Terry? Your mic's live, so what would have happened if you hadn't?
I would have been in a very serious accident.
Yeah. It makes you wonder why, how many accidents, how many fender benders, the big and small, how many of them are simply because we're doing something else. We're trying to text, we're trying to call, we're trying to listen to the radio, a podcast. We're trying to do anything but simply drive. I'm glad to hear that, Terry. Glad to hear that. Yeah. Well, these are the new rules of engagement. Last week we spent time on learning to be present. Simply, how do I pay attention and be aware of other people when I'm engaged with them? Today's rule of engagement is what we call learn to ask. Learn to ask. And a lot of people, they'll wonder, they'll say, well, what do you mean learn to ask? What are you talking about? I'm the boss. I'm supposed to have the idea. And why should I learn to ask? I have this, I'm in a position of responsibility and authority for a reason. Why should I learn to ask? My number one reason is, you know what? Leadership ain't easy. Leadership in a management role, in a leading role. I had seen this somewhere posted not too long ago. Not the leadership isn't easy, but this string of pictures. Leadership isn't an easy process. And I think the main reason is that it's a no normal world. If you think about it, everybody keeps waiting for things to settle down. And if you think about it, things aren't going to settle down. I'm here to tell you that when we look at this, the idea of learn to ask. You know what, it used to be, it literally was at one time that strategic planning was kind of taking last year's numbers, bump them by 10 to whatever %, and that was your new strategic plan. How do you think that works for us these days? People keep thinking, okay, yeah, it's pretty much calming down. Things are kind of back to normal. Things have settled down a little bit. Well, I think all but very few had a surprise the first Tuesday of last November in terms of no normal. Regardless of your politics, it was not an expected event. And if I think about that, this whole idea of no normal is all about change and what's different about change today. It's about relationships where we don't have the relationships of yesterday. You don't have people that retire at 50 or 60 and then have a pension until they're 90. It just doesn't happen anymore, and it's not going to change back. It's not changing back. The thing about change now too is that there's nobody exempt. It used to be just, at one time in the 80s, the domestic automakers were getting their you-know-what handed to them by competition. They realized and learned a lot of things. As a matter of fact, they got into a lot of lean process in that. Well, guess who's been getting into lean process over the last 5 years? Healthcare delivery, healthcare provision. They're looking at value streams and how the same way that airlines were looking at one time 20 or 30 years ago and looking at, well, gee, what are ideal or target line weights? And I can tell you at one time with United Airlines, it was no more than 4 minutes. Well, now hospitals are starting to look at the same things and saying, what is a reasonable ER or emergency department visit length? How long should it be from the time they come in till the time they are treated or till the time they are leaving? So this no normal world, if I look at it, says we're in a business, this was from a couple of books ago that I'd written about. It's a business world in flux, a change curve that's global. Everybody's on it. And fallout for you as an individual, but also for you as a leader. I mean, to me, it magnifies. If I think, why do I want to ask? I'm trying to lead you there right now. Because not only is it different for you, we looked at how different it is, how tough it is just to get somebody to pay attention anymore. How many people are on their phone or texting, not only while they're driving, but while they're standing at the checkout counter, while they're standing somewhere else and expecting those around them to wait. It's a different world, and it makes it even tougher as a leader because you know what? You're in the business of other people doing what you need them to do and other people doing what you need them to do while they feel good about it. And this kind of world makes it tough that what I would like to, through these competencies, is to help you build your return on leadership, the leadership return that you're able to generate. And I love using this diagram because it goes back to different motivational theories of many days gone by, but that still apply of why we do things. And you can take someone that is well motivated and committed and brings that to the job. Like I said, job satisfaction isn't necessarily about something that happens on the job. Job satisfaction, usually the best predictors is how happy we are with ourselves to begin with. But if you get somebody that brings that positive self-evaluation to the role, they are happy with the terms and conditions in leadership, they can sustain 80% of their potential. Someone that is not motivated, someone that is demotivated, disengaged, this is really what engagement is about, and whether we try to create engagement in others or those others bring it to their job, there's a lot of people that can stay employed and give about 30% of their potential. There's some very bright, very creative individuals that can give about 30% of what they're capable of and still stay employed. And that, to me, that hash between 30% and 80% is the difference between them. It's the difference. That's your return on leadership, the difference between 30 and 80. What a huge, it doesn't mean I've got to put on more staff, doesn't mean I've got to put in for, this is about what you can do. And people ask, everybody wants to know an X factor. Everybody wants to net it out. What's the difference between that, getting 30 and getting 80 from somebody? Usually it's a case of empathy. Usually it's a case of empathy. It's the X factor in your leadership role, and this is where I'm leading in terms of learning how to ask and why you want to do it. Empathy is simply understanding and being aware of the thoughts and feelings and experiences of somebody else. That's all empathy is. And it's organic. It's something we bring from birth. I've got a granddaughter on order. I'll have one in March, middle of March, so I got 2 months. So another 60 days I'll have one. You at a hospital nursery, when one baby starts crying, all of them do. We are wired to connect with other people. The problem is, and we brought it up last week in this idea of learning to be present with the time technology paradox we've got going on, we're losing that. One of the biggest hits we're taking in terms of not being able to be present with others is that we've stopped connecting with them. And usually it's not something that you have to earn that connection. People will give you that connection. You've just got to earn the right to keep it. In my musical practice, we talk about you go out on stage, people, they'll give you an applause before you've even done anything. They will give you that stage. They give you that connection, and it's up to you to maintain it and not lose it. Well, we're doing a lousy job of maintaining it today, because you've got a world here where, yes, this is the X factor is empathy, but you know what? It's dropping. It dropped in the year 2000, 40%. It had been constant since 1979. And if you ever want to know about anything more about empathy, go to the University of Michigan Institute for Social Research. So just U of MISR and empathy, and Google that, and you'll learn more than you'd ever. It'll scare you what you learn about empathy today in each successive generation. And here where it says a huge drop there in the year 2000, cognitive and emotional. Cognitive is, do I understand your perspective? Emotional is, do I care? Both of them drop like a rock. And when empathy drops, narcissism is up. Everybody's got an answer and nobody's willing to ask. I love that little thing. If I realized I have a road rage problem when my kids started yelling, yeah. So if you think about this, it's this idea of what happens is not only has narcissism and ego gone up, empathy has gone down. So we've changed the empathy-ego balance in what we're doing. And in many ways, it's such a polarized, it's probably a more polarized environment than we've ever seen. And given that you take that plus a North American cultural perspective that, you know what, we're supposed to have all the answers. It's a sign of weakness in some organization not to have them. I'll have people tell me, well, you know, I'm fine with letting go and delegating to my people, but my boss always wants me to know, wants me to be right there with the answer at the fingertips. Maybe, maybe not. But this, to me, is what has really brought it home to me, the idea of learn to ask as a rule of engagement. It's not, I mean, what happens is it's a contact sport. What we do in leadership is a contact sport. It's really personal. It's not something I can phone it in while I'm sitting at my computer all day. It's full-time, full service. It takes a lot of energy. Human interaction. I get bosses that will tell me, you know what, the thing that kills me is that it's it's not something I can just do. It's the hardest part of my job is working with my people. Well, that's what leadership is. And to try and increase that return, you got to learn how to ask, and not just for the other. We kind of talk last week about the benefits of being present is, to me, I think you could narrow it down to clarity and confidence and calm. You know, if you've really done some work in trying to be better at being present, it's about being calm. If I look at it here, the benefits to learning to ask is probably focus and friendship and some freedom. Focus, friendship, and freedom. So as you look at this, this is what I'm saying. Let's see if we've got, I think we got some chats in there. Oh, I do have a couple of notes there.
You do. You do.
Yeah. All right. My apologies. Yeah.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt you when they came in.
Okay.
You were on a roll.
Yeah. Well, we're having fun, and it's a good spot here to look at these as these rules of engagement come together. Naya says, I check out after the workday. Turn on some relaxing music in the car. Don't look at my work emails. Love it, Naya. The idea that of setting, there's some people, I work a lot of times with people new to different organizations, particularly on the rep side, and they'll say, oh, good idea, I'll turn my email off at 5. And I said, well, you'll probably find that's not practical, but 7 you should definitely, or 8 at the latest. And ways that you say, you know what, how about a ritual to transition in terms of being present, to transition from work to home. Yvonne's got stop to listen instead of interrupting someone to make my point. Learned a lot more, and the other person seemed to be more engaged. Isn't that something? Where if in my trying to be a little more present and all that, you know what the suggestion is there too, Yvonne? It's simply take a breath before you respond. I'll suggest that to people a lot of times where they'll say, what should I do to do a better job of being present with someone? I'll say, take a breath, because it does 2 things. It gives you a little oxygen, helps your brain work better. And while I'm breathing, I'm being quiet. And when I do that, all of a sudden, not only am I more engaged, but so are they. Awesome. You're fine. And then Terry says, why do you think empathy has dropped so far? From my work with Sarah Conrath over at U of M, and in talking to her, she's quite an expert. As I understand it, and they haven't tried to statistically correlate, but here's their suspicions. One is that the technology paradox, that we have to have, it's such a slim support world. We got to do everything. Things that people used to do for us, we have to do it all on our iPhone, so to speak, or Samsung, whatever you got. But the other one is this too, Terry. A lot of people think empathy dropped because of the self-esteem movement of the last 30 years, last 1.5 to 2 generations. The idea that everybody gets a ribbon, and that self-esteem matters more than self-control. That's what at the Institute, that is their supposition. They're not trying to correlate it. They're trying to track it, and they're working with different individuals. But they also, I can tell you from having worked with thousands of people, that most people can pay attention for about 18 seconds before they drift into their narrative circuit, and they got to pull themselves back in, or something needs to pull them back in. So unfortunately, that time technology paradox that we've got, and if we don't set boundaries, like Yvonne says here, setting some boundaries and saying, hey, my email's off at home, or Yvonne and also Naya. Yeah, if we don't set those, we lose it. And then the other side is the discipline that it takes. I know in working with Marshall Goldsmith, who is somebody that has mentored me or provided a lot of mentoring to me in terms of some of my research and some of my thinking, he and Dr. Hersey both. His thing is that it takes discipline and courage and humility to get better, to change. I'm going to add one more onto that, and that's self-forgiveness. That that difference of losing the discipline to follow a process, losing the courage to give it a try, instead of saying, well, my boss wants me to. Losing the humility in terms of letting ego drive everything we do, always having to win, always having to have the right answer. And so it's picking the things here in terms of learning how to ask. It is to terms of learning how to ask is that, you know what, pardon me, it's an era that we're in right now that we don't know what's coming. I don't know that we ever really could predict. It's just the pace of change was slower. So if we said, well, it's going to be another year like this, we might be close. But we gotta, if we want to know and plan, we have to find out. And in many cases, we have to ask someone because it's just it's too complex for us. And now let me get into the heart of some of the stuff that we really love doing, and that is, you know what, we've begun the asking for you. And it's the power of, in this case, it's a nice size study. It's a nice size study that we've done. And before I give you answers and such, I'd like to do a little bit of an exercise right now. I would like you, if you would, to answer one simple question and text it in. Text it in, do the chat thing, and I won't call your name out. I'll just look, and we'll look at some of the responses. But if just one simple question, one thing, if you could tell your boss just one thing about his or her leadership of you, what would you say? It's a really good, you talk about small data. We ask one question of people, and we leave it open. So many times the data that people try to collect, they take you through 27 questions and that they think they know what to ask. Instead, here I'm just saying, if you could tell your boss just one thing about their leadership of you, what would you say? And go ahead, just take a second there. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Bruce. I have one response that says, thanks for trusting me. I have another one that says, I appreciate the autonomy. Another one that says, give me more than, hey, more to come. Another one says, let me believe you trust me, even if you don't. So we've got here, what happens is, this is something, again, what we've tried to do with different organizations and with different people is to learn. And if there's others that are typing in, ditto on the autonomy, one of them says, ditto. I don't have a boss, but in the past, I would have said, trust me to do what you hired me to do. Wow. You know, and what's pretty cool is, like I said, we're not asking people to, gee, here's the 17 questions we want to ask. We're just saying, hey, if you could tell us just one thing, what would it be? If you could tell your boss just one thing. And we get these kind of answers. These answers come in the same just about every time, and no matter where we are in the world, we get you look at the preponderance here of autonomy and trust. Trust and autonomy. Autonomy and trust. Is anybody saying in here, boy, if I could ask my boss, or if I could tell my boss just one thing, I'd tell him to guide me some more. Give me some more directions and war stories. It's saying, trust me. Give me the autonomy to do the job you hired me to do. Great stuff. Appreciate the autonomy. Thanks for trusting me. Let me believe you trust me, even if you don't. Ditto on the autonomy. Ditto on that. I don't have a boss, but in the past I would have said, trust me to do what you hired me to do. You hired me for a reason. It's interesting that I go into different jobs, and like I mentioned, I work with a lot of new hires, a lot of people that are new to an organization in a significant role. I work with leaders in transition a lot. Maybe not new to the organization, but they're moving through the pipeline, moving up through the pipeline. And a lot of times the way to, they're the ones who won. Matter of fact, I'll even ask, and for the most part, those are people that have never not been offered a job that they applied for. And yet in most cases, we don't think trust first. We don't think, why? Because we got all the pressure. Why? Because we've got cultural drivers in that. But what really happens here is, let me tell you too, these are just what came up here on this webinar of a few simple requests that people have for their boss. If I could tell you just one thing. Well, in the process, in 2 books ago, what we did is we got 6,000 responses to that. If you could tell your boss just one thing, what would you say? 6,000 answers from that. That's some pretty good stuff. And you know what? Let me ask you this question. I'll even let you type this in if you want. What percentage of those answers? We got 6,000 answers around the world asking people. I mean, it was equally distributed by level, by years on the job, geographically. We were in APAC, we were in EMEA, we were all over the Americas. And let me ask you, what percentage of the answers do you think were negative? And I'll look for your, somebody said 10%, somebody said 2%, somebody said 10%. I'll tell you what the 30% Karen says. And I can tell you 60%, another says. So we've got ranges from 2% to 60%. And I can tell you that, again, having worked with thousands of people and asked that question of them, that 40 to 60% range when you ask people, and of course it depends on where you work and a whole bunch of other factors, but I can tell you this, when we ask people, yes, the answers come back very often in that 40 to 60% range. Was that another? I think I'm hearing a text. Okay, maybe I was getting an auditory cue on a text. When we ask them, the majority of people believe that, yeah, it's probably in 40 to 60%. Half of them are negative, 60% are negative. Well, here's what I've got. The average of all of those was 6.8%. 6.8% were complete. I mean, I can tell you, I mean, I read every one of those 6,000 responses, read every one of them, and 6.8% were the totally negative. And I think my favorite of the negative was someone said even a monkey could do it better. Okay, there's no mistaking the sentiment there. But only 6 point. I mean, you would have ones that would offer guidance and feedback on it, and some of them could have been constructive in criticism. But in terms of all negative, it was less than 7%, even though most of us think it's probably in that 40, 50, 60% range. I can tell you too, let me ask you one more question. Go ahead and chat in your answer here. What was the number one answer? When we asked them, what would you say? If you could tell your boss just one thing about their leadership of you, what would you say? What was the number one answer? And take your time here. We've got it. It does fly by. I mean, we've got another 30 minutes left, but we got plenty of time. Somebody said something related to trust. Yeah. Somebody else want to take shots at it? The number one answer. Trust again, from Terry. Autonomy. A couple of trusts and autonomy, just like this group. Number one answer, survey says, what is this? What's the television show where you're competing? Number one answer. Thank you. Family Feud, I guess, is the show. The number one answer was thank you, an expression of appreciation of one kind or another. The one that resonated the most, that came up the most often, were some combination of thank you, I appreciate it, people saying thank you to their boss. And it was all, none of it was, people were saying, well, you know, they didn't want to answer anything negatively. Well, I tell you what, out of 6,000 data points, there's some information there. You know, can you statistically, reliably, and in a valid fashion apply that? I don't know. But it's a lot of data. And it's a lot of data where people said, you know what, there's not many of us. And the conclusion I draw, well, let me even give you a little more data as we look at it. Yes, Family Feud, there we go. Survey says, well, let me give you a little more data. You look at this. This is a word cloud of those answers. And what happens is you can get sentiment and you can get frequency, among other things. And we did categorization and everything else. But here what you've got what you've got in terms of sentiment is green is positive, gray is neutral, or bluish gray is neutral, and red is negative. I mean, if you look at this, the larger the type font, the more often the words come up. People say, if I could tell my boss one thing, it would be an appreciation of your style of leadership, that you're doing good work, that I'm happy to be a member of the team, that you're doing a good job or a great job, that you make decisions as a leader, that you are a good leader, that you have leadership skill. Look at all the green terms that are in here. And to tell you the truth, these were kind of surprises to us as well in doing the research. And you look at this, pardon me, you look at this, and it's a way to understand, that, well, maybe a lot of the fears and worries I have as a leader, that I'm supposed to have the answer, that I'm supposed to be the one that guides us, the navigator. Maybe that doesn't have to happen, and that while there are negative or negative sentiment responses in here, not as much. You cut that data another way, and here was that sentiment. There was some anger and confusion, but if you start to look at it, and anger doesn't mean totally negative either. There was anticipation, embarrassment, surprise, disgust. The disgust is a pretty small slice, but look at the major sentiment. Look at the major sentiment in here. You got a question, I think. I'm being asked, so does this mean their boss provided them with motivation? In looking at this, a lot of times, yes, as the leader, as the boss, we are a factor in what goes on. Okay? We have something to do with the organization, and we have something to do with their motivation. But Bruce, I did mention too a couple of things. One, that the best predictor of job satisfaction is core self-evaluation. In other words, how we evaluate ourselves, how happy we are with ourselves. And in looking at this data, what it tells me, that yes, the boss has provided motivation, but it also tells me that because the subject is, if you could tell your boss just one thing about their leadership of you, what would you say? It tells me that more than half of them are happy with the job. As the simple, even up to love. I mean, if you look at that, what is that? That's probably, it's probably, if you would look at it as maybe over 60% of the sentiment involved is happiness. Did I cause the happiness? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they're bringing it with them. Maybe I don't realize just how motivated a workforce I have. Because if Bruce knows me, and matter of fact, if I look at it, I talk about the fact that, you know what, I don't really motivate other people. I can create movement in others. I can apply consequences and try to create some movement. And those consequences can be positive, they can be negative. I can provide sanctions in punishment, or I can withhold. I can provide positive reinforcement. I can provide the incentive of future reinforcement. But you know what, Bruce, I think, I think what it is either, in Terry's case, I've established an environment where they feel confident, happy, satisfied, and so on. Or I'll even plug this in there. How about I'm just not screwing it up? When it really comes down to it, again, with empathy, people generally will give you that connection. If any of you have ever done any public speaking, you'll go out there and just say, Don Brown, and clap, 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 and you've done nothing to deserve it. Well, people will give you that connection at work too. And that, to me, is the other reason to learn to ask. Because I'll tell you what, and I would suggest for all of you, this one question here of, hey, if you could tell me one thing about my leadership of you, what would you say? Let me suggest, why don't you either either do it in the form of an email if you have good relations, or if you want, go to surveymonkey.com. And you can get a free SurveyMonkey thing where you can set it up where you say, go to that, and the responses are anonymous, and you can set it up to be anonymous. The responses are anonymous, and just tell me, if you could tell me one thing about leadership, what would you say? Send that to the average, what is it these days, 8 or 10 people or 12 people that report to a given leader. If you've got those people that work to you, just send that and see what kind of response you get. Because I'll tell you what, that to me is, it's beginning to ask and not feeling like you got to know what questions to ask. You don't have to have 17 of them. And let me ask too, chat in if you would, anybody that would like to. If I learn to ask, in other words, where I get out of the habit of always having to have the darn answer with my people, if I get into the habit of learning to ask individuals, what is generally going to be their response? I feel that, hey, I'm going to be able to learn more answers if I'm willing to ask. I don't have to have every answer at the tip of my tongue. But when I ask somebody, hey, if you could tell me one thing about my leadership, what would you say? What impression is that going to create with them? And I'll ask Terry and Naya. Yeah, Naya says, employees feel valued for their input. They feel appreciated for the work they do. And all I'm doing is asking them. Absolutely, Naya. It's a twofer for me. I can learn something, and maybe both learn things I should that I need to know that I wouldn't have known otherwise had I not asked. And the twofer is the people I'm asking feel good about it. It's like anything else. It might not be easy, but it's simple as heck. Yvonne says it's also about asking the right questions, not just any question. Absolutely. And the right question to me is, don't assume you know what to ask in this case. The idea of, hey, if you could tell me one thing about my leadership, what would you tell me? If you could just give me one piece of advice, one thing. Terry says, the best piece of advice I got as a new manager was that I didn't need to know all the answers. I just need to know where to find them, under what rock they reside. Absolutely. And not only do I get the idea of asking the right questions and knowing where the answers are if I can, or who to go to, and my people feel valued, it's very liberating. If you remember with learning to be present, I had mentioned, and you might even for learning to be present, if you have a spot for notes, write down clarity, confidence, and calm. Clarity, confidence, and calm is what learning to be present gives me. Learning to ask gives me focus, friendship, and freedom. And I use that term loosely in terms of friendship. To me, it gives me rapport. It gives me focus, friendship, and freedom. It gives me the freedom not to have every answer out there. God, how liberating is that? That I don't have to have every answer under the sun. Learning to ask provides us focus because it gives us that shining light, so to speak. It builds friendship. It builds rapport. It builds this kind of success. Yeah. Okay. Well, we got some more. Yeah. Thank you, Katie. Says, quit being so hard on yourself for not being perfect. That's what I meant too about in Marshall saying people get better are the ones with discipline and courage and humility. And I also add, like Katie just did, let's add a little bit of self-forgiveness. And I know there's some people in my life that I know that are very hard on themselves, that they feel they're supposed to have every answer. And and if they don't have the answer, it's like, well, I'm failing. Too many leaders, managers see asking questions as weakness. Yes, and the weak shall be killed and eaten, depending on the organization you reside in. Sure it does, Terry. Absolutely. And there's, we can go back, and I think most of us realize this idea of First, we're supposed to juggle stuff so that, no, we can't. We can have an open door, but we can't pay attention to you when you come in. Then we get to the point that says, you know what, I'm supposed to have every answer. I got to be certain whether I'm right or wrong. How dangerous is that? I got to be certain, but whether I'm right or wrong, I got to be certain. Well, and to the idea of knowing what to, having the right questions to ask too. One of the things that we did is kind of drawing some conclusions in leadership today. Most of them saying thank you. Most of them, not many of them being that angry, and the sentiment pie like this being distributed as it is. My conclusion, most of them aren't angry, they're waiting. They're waiting on you. They're waiting on us. You know what I mean? If you think about it, it's so simple. I'll tell leaders that I work with that, you know what, your people are professional boss watchers, just like you are. And it kind of brings them up short when they realize, you know what, yeah, I'm a boss watcher. And they don't realize they are being watched in the same fashion, and people aren't angry with us. You mentioned before about that I'm providing motivation. I think a lot of it is the organization isn't screwing it up. We can be in a powerful, forward-thinking, doing it right organization, and we aren't. Even when people get angry with the organization, they can be happy with their boss, I think. And what happens is they're not angry with us. They're waiting on us. They're waiting on us to ask. They're waiting on us to show, as you did, as the people on this webinar said, waiting for trust and autonomy. I didn't take this job to have somebody with their thumb on my neck the whole time, waiting for trust and autonomy. They're not angry. They're waiting. You know, leadership is that contact sport. It's personal. Increase your return on leadership. If I look at it, this is what builds from 30% engagement to 80% engagement that they can sustain realistically. Learning to ask. And here's another question or set. The one question, the first one we asked was, if you could tell your boss just one thing about their leadership, what would you say? Then we asked, in leading you, what do you want your boss to start doing? Or what do you want them to stop doing? What do you want them to continue doing? Again, 6,000 responses on what people want their boss to start doing, stop doing. It's a beautiful, there was a lot of good stuff in there in terms of what to start, what to stop. I'll even ask you, before I give you some categorization that we got out of these, because the first we were getting at, what do you want your boss to know? And now this set of questions is, what do you want your boss to do? Difference between what you want them to know and what you want them to do. Go ahead and chat in. If you could tell your boss to start doing, stop doing, or keep on doing, continue doing. Yes, Yvonne. Yvonne had in there about people may not be angry, but many can be frustrated. Absolutely. And many times frustrated, but not with you. They might be. There are a lot of people I know, before we get into what you want them to do, there's a lot of people I know that they might have lost their, in the downturn, they might have lost their job and they were out of work for a year or two, and then they started and they had another job, but they were making 60% of what they were. They have been taking cutbacks, right-sizing, and everything. They've been living through a lot. I've heard a CEO tell the top 40 people in an organization of some 3,000, the organization is loyal to you as long as you make your numbers. Whew. Now that person might work for you. They're not mad at you, but they might not be all that happy there. But let me ask you to type in your message box. If you could, if there's something that you want your boss to start doing, what is it? Do you want your boss to stop doing something? Do you want your boss to continue doing something? Something that they're doing right now that you want them to keep up? What might that be? Just to get a couple little ideas here. What do you want your boss to start, stop, or continue doing? I'll wait and sometimes there's a little bit of a tech lag here. My apologies if you've already typed something. We've got one that says, start listening, stop dismissing. Hell of a lot easier, excuse me, heck of a lot easier to listen if you ask a question. Stop dismissing. How about someone else? Would you like someone to start doing or stop doing? Someone says, stop telling me more to come. Continue with the trust and autonomy. Stop micromanaging. Start listening. Continue treating me with respect. Continue being a role model for self-improvement. Dig it. When you have somebody that you look up to, you say, you know what? Keep on being that role model for self-improvement for me, because maybe I haven't been at it as long as you have, or maybe I haven't been at this particular function. And I see a lot of keep teaching me out of people. And yes, the number one stop, Yvonne, you got it. The number one stop is micromanaging. Number one stop is micromanaging. Yeah, it is. Start, stop, and continue. And you know what, too? We took this, and in terms of the research we did, not only can you get sentiment and frequency and so on, but you can categorize. And we categorize data by saying, all right, what kind of categories might all these responses of what they want us to do, where might they fall? Well, here they are in order of how they fell out. What our people want us to do, what they want from us in terms of what we do with them is communication, feedback, and autonomy. In that order, as much as autonomy and trust came up with this group, in a much larger sample, this is the way the hierarchy falls out. And it's almost like if we think about this as, we said that learning to be present is such a critical competency, that this is a life in a world where we live in the moment. We lead in the moment. I'll tell you what, it's not about what I do every quarter. It's, Don, you got a second? That's when leadership happens. And the number one cry is for communicate, understand, and this, what this leads to is, you'll see later, this idea of them saying, this is what I want and need from you. That is what built our the last rule of engagement, which is learn to follow a protocol. But that's for next Wednesday. But this category of communication, feedback, autonomy, they want communication. They want to know. They want to establish the ground rules. They want to understand from you. They want you to tell them what's going on. They also want to know how they're doing in terms of feedback. Communication is one thing. Feedback is a very specific. I want to know how I'm doing, and I want to know it from you. And the last, of course, is the autonomy. The autonomy to, and I don't use, those of you that, there's a couple that know me on this webinar or have experience with me. I don't use too many sports analogies, but the one that works for me, particularly about autonomy, has to do with track and field. I had one daughter that did some track and field, and I had never seen the relays, but when you watch a relay race, there's a set lane, that there's a space and a time where you have to do the handoff. And that's just the rule of the race. And if you don't do that, if you make that handoff too early, too late, boom, you get points deducted. Well, I think a lot of us forget about it as leaders. Yes, I've got to communicate. We understand the communication. We understand. We may not do it, but at least we understand it. We understand our job is to coach and develop our people through appropriate feedback. But a lot of us, we don't think about the fact that, you know what, autonomy is that driver. And there is a process. There's a time and a place for autonomy, and I've got to plan it. I've got to put it into my rules. My job is to create that readiness and then get out of their way. And then get out of their way. Absolutely. Thoughts, comments on your response to that, the idea of this triad, this loaded triad of needs from your people. And what I meant by leading in the moment is, on any given moment, there could be one or two or three of these felt needs being displayed. But what I want to try and do as a leader is to try and understand in any given moment, what do they need? Do they need communication? And then I've got some things to say about that. Do they need feedback, or do they need autonomy? And I'll tell you what, if you can ask that question, communication, feedback, or autonomy, you're halfway there. You're ahead of the game right there. I have a note. I work with technical people in Silicon Valley, and autonomy is a major desire. Why is that, Yvonne, in terms of, is it the technical nature of it? Is it Silicon Valley? Or tell me how you know that autonomy is such a major desire. What tells you that? I'd love to hear this, because this to me is our ultimate goal. My ultimate goal as a leader is that you're doing it on your own without me involved in it. But Yvonne, how do you know that autonomy is so important to them? I believe you. I'm just curious. I'm always curious. Part of it has to do with the type of work they do, and because they are being called upon to innovate. Aha. Innovate is not, if you want me to innovate, it's not something you're going to be micromanaging. Dig it. Yeah. That you don't micromanage innovation. That isn't something that I just say, oh, let me get a little more involved in your creative work. Unless we're a songwriting pair, unless we're Lennon and McCartney, or unless we're people that work together to create and innovate, it's not something I'm going to push. I got another one here. So the feedback piece is really important, not just to give it, but to ask for it from your team and accept it. Absolutely, Cheryl. Not for a gotcha or against the person who gave it to you if it was negative. Yeah, sometimes sometimes feedback isn't easy, but it is the breakfast of champions, if I may. Yeah. So again, this is the triad. If you're ever looking for what, I'm a rule of three guy, and I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the concept of the rule of three. Well, I mean, the rule of three simply means that, you know what, it's a lot more manageable. A lot of the most powerful concepts in life are based on a triad, whether it's comedy or drama or the Holy Trinity or any of the structures of most organized Western religion. Or if it's the United States Marine Corps, a triad works. Yeah. Naya asked, can we present, or can you open up Naya's microphone there, Terry? Oh, sorry. I will disregard, Naya. No problem. No problem. Yeah, I mean, as we go, I wanted to get this out because it does build on what we're going to do next week, and I want you to think about the idea of, because everything is so fast-paced, or half the time we don't have hours and hours every week that we spend with people. Sometimes we only spend a few minutes, and they live somewhere else, and we get phone calls. And in my musical practice, we have a saying that says, set your intention for a song. And I've done that with some students. They say, well, what's your intention? What do you see? And they'll say, huh? I said, what is your intention in learning and playing and performing this piece? If you don't have that, in music, and what I'll say in communicating, generally it is to evoke. It's to evoke an emotion, an action. It's to evoke a feeling. It's to evoke a thought. Well, what is that? And that's what I'm trying to do here, is when you think about your leadership interactions with someone else, set your intention. Set your intention. Is it to communicate? Set your intention. Is it to provide feedback at this point, performance feedback? Is it regarding autonomy? Is it to let go? Is it to let go of something that, sometimes maybe something you should have let go of long ago? There's a couple of things I want to get here. It's 3:45, 12:45 your time, and we have 15 minutes left. A couple things I want to do is, as well as to always get you out 5 minutes early if you like. The first would be this, is that I would challenge you, or encourage you, let's say, use the power of small data. And by that, it doesn't have to be, every organization, every big organization does engagement studies. Well, if you would like to gather some small data on your own, that's what I was saying. It's a free account on surveymonkey.com. Set up a survey that asks 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of these questions, and send it to people whose opinion you trust and respect and you would like to solicit. You'd be surprised with what you get back. Do it so that it is. And here's another one I'm going to bring up with you, and trust me, it's probably the most powerful thing we've got. Here's a bonus question. For any of you that have kids that are 14 and over, say, some of them 12 and over, some of them some old souls, even at 12, but send them a text today. When we're done, send it right now if you want to. But I will ask, a lot of times when I'm working with groups, big and small, I'll say, you know what, when we take this break, go text one of your kids, hey, if you could tell me just one thing about my parenting of you, what would you say? And I'll tell you what, you can hear the room go quiet. If you really want to know and get some information about your influence dynamics and some of your influence habits, ask at home. Because it's probably where you're at your most raw, and it's probably where you're at your normal median, put it that way. People that tell me that, oh no, I'm obnoxious at work, but I'm not at home. Well, then let's get their significant other's phone number, and we'll call them and find out. Because what happens here is I'll get people that'll come back after that lunch or after that break, and they'll say, Don, I got an answer. And I'll say, tell us all if you wouldn't mind. And I've had people say things like they asked one guy asked his son, if you could tell me one thing about my parenting of you, what would you say? And his son returned, well, a lot of teenage sons will answer first with, what? But this particular son answered and said, you know what? Said, I'm getting ready to go to college in the fall, and I'm as well prepared as anybody can be, and it's all because of my dad. You look at that and you think, wow, what kind of answer? How cool is that? Those are the kind of responses that we get. Those are the responses we get, is that people come back and they get ones that really warm their heart. And why didn't they ask? Because if they never would have asked, and they'll come back and they'll say, Don, if I hadn't asked this, I never would have gotten this answer, and I never would have felt this glow. Well, you know what? Think about it. Why don't we ask? Why don't we ask our kids? Why don't we ask? Somebody's son just said, why? I told you, most guys, they say, huh? They need a little explanation. But asking your parents, somebody had said, Terry said you could ask parents or colleagues. This idea of understanding, why don't we ask? Because we're afraid of the answer. We don't ask our kids. We don't ask our employees. We're afraid to be seen as weak, as many of you had said it in there. We're afraid to be seen as somebody that isn't in control. And you know what? It's one way of somebody, Yvonne had said in here, without setting an intention, you're like flotsam at the mercy of a river. Absolutely. Absolutely. Asking. Ask your parents. Absolutely. You could ask your parents, hey, if you could tell me one thing about my parenting of my kids, what would you say? Because a lot of times we get a lot of, what happens here is a lot of times we get a lot of advice from people without asking them. But I'll tell you, when you take the time to ask and then be quiet, That's when you get the nuggets. That's when you get the golden responses. It really is. That's when you get the good stuff. Any thoughts, comments, or slander as we, I've got 10 minutes, 10 to 11 minutes remaining, but I always plan to give you the last 5 to 7 and let you go early. Everybody's got a ton of things, people knocking at their door, but questions, comments, or slander that you'd like to put across as we close this out? I've got a couple other things here. Some of the things I'll add have to do with, you know, the first 2 rules of engagement: learn to be present. The second one, learn to ask. And a lot of the reason why it's hard for us to do it is because of boundaries. I think it was Nayad said, you know, I turn my email off. I go home, listen to a little music, turn my email off as a boundary, as some balance in my life. Building that, if nothing else, to have the energy to lead the next day instead of depleting myself to the point where I can't recover. Well, in doing that, consider what you have. Consider what you have, and I'll even give you, you know, we all have hobbies. We have things we like to do, and I'm probably not going to do it today, but this is where you might see me sometimes. Old Mo's getting old, but whatever it might be. Riding a horse, playing a guitar, playing some soccer, playing some basketball or volleyball, creating things that are artistic, creating these kind of moments for yourself. You know, these kind of moments at work, you don't see them except from inside when you watch the sun go down. That's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. And as I look, I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to find ways to first still learning to do a better job of being present with others. And then finally this idea of how do I set some boundaries? How do I get some minutes like this? Think about that over the next week. I don't know if we've got other, yes. I don't know if we've got other comments, but what I would say this too is next week. First one was about the clarity and confidence and calm we can get by learning to be present. Today was about the focus and the friendship and the freedom we gain by learning to ask. Well, next week is all about learning to follow and learning to follow a protocol. I've got a friend of mine that had leukemia at one time, and I know they call it a neutropenic protocol, which says when you're dealing with people with a compromised immune system, you scrub and glove and gown and mask, so as not to infect that individual. There's a protocol you follow. There's a protocol that you follow to wash before, to wash your hands before you gown and do this, even in surgical procedures and that. Well, next week we're going to give you a protocol you can follow when interacting with people. Bruce's daughter, he sent out a note and said, if you could tell me one thing about my parenting, what would you say? And she said, you don't sugarcoat it. You don't sugarcoat. And you know what? That's awesome. You wouldn't have known that perspective of her. You wouldn't have seen the world. Empathy is about understanding, and to maintain a connection is to understand and care about someone else's perspective. And you probably won't know someone else's perspective unless you ask. God bless you, Bruce. Yeah. Now he says, nope, I would never have asked, and now I know. Well, that's how we gain someone else. That's how we can understand it and care about someone else's perspective, and it pays massive dividends. It moves people from that 30% column of their potential to giving you 80. It gives you a huge return on leadership. With that, hey, I've enjoyed my time with you. If there's anything else, you've all got my email, don@donbrown.org. If you ever want to chat, questions, comments, slander, I'm okay with that. Until next week, then, I've got 3:54. You're 6 minutes early, or you've got 1:54. But I wish you abundance and contentment. Having what you'd like and being happy with what you have. And Other than that, Terry, anything from you? If not, we'll see y'all next week.
I would just like to thank you for your pearls of wisdom and the food for thought that you have once again given us, and just offer that out there to the rest of the group on the phone. Thank you for your time and your attention, and let's practice. Let's practice the question this week. I think I might throw my dad for a loop when I ask him, what do you think about, if there's one thing you could tell me about me being your daughter, what would it be?
That's right.
I'm afraid of the answer, Don, but I'm going to ask it.
God, it just opens things up. It opens us up to life and opens others, and it might be the first time I've ever asked anything like that.
Right. That really is true. So, again, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for your time. And I will send out the recording for this video and last week's, and hopefully I'll figure out how to save it properly in YouTube so you can actually get to it.
All right.
So, all right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
You're welcome to each of you. Cheers.
Bye.